Imagine a world where being single is forbidden, and those without a romantic relationship are sent to a hotel in which they have 45 days to fall in love, or they will be transformed into animals. However, if they catch other illegal singles called loners, they can extend their stay. A woman was driving on the highway when she got out of the car in the middle of a field where we see 3 donkeys and totally executes one. Perhaps it was an unfaithful ex-lover she was taking revenge on. David, an architect whose wife of 11 years has cheated on him and is leaving him for another man. David is taken to a hotel to find a new partner. David is accompanied by his dog Bob, who's actually his brother, transformed because he couldn't find a partner in time. Upon arrival, a receptionist interviews him and asks about his preferences. David says he likes women, but then asks if he can choose both. The receptionist replies that his option is no longer available, so he picks only women. It is mentioned that he will have a single room, but if he finds a partner in time, he can change to a double. A maid informs him that he will not be able to keep his personal belongings at the hotel, and that they will be able to provide everything necessary from clothing to food. David asks for half-size shoes, but the maid tells him that she only has whole sizes. Installed in his room, David receives a shotgun and 20 tranquilizer darts. From his window, he observes the illegal singles knocked out to be hunted like animals by hotel guests in order to extend their 45-day stay. The manager, accompanied by her husband, enters his room and explains the hotel's rules. She tells him that if he doesn't fall in love and turns into an animal, he shouldn't be depressed because as an animal, he'll find another chance to find a partner. Although it has to be the same animal. Maybe that was the case with the donkey we saw at the beginning, since he wasn't alone, and the woman was just frustrated at him. When asked about his chosen animal, David says a lobster because they lived over 100 years, are blue-blooded like aristocrats, remain fertile their whole lives, and he loves the sea. The manager congratulates him because almost everyone chooses to be a dog, and the world is already full of them. Basically, if you reach a certain point in your life and you haven't achieved what is expected of you at that age, you are rejected because you don't fit in what society dictates. It's like a metaphor that after a certain time, if you don't have your life together, you're a disappointment. You are seen as something inferior, like an animal. The next rule is even stranger. The maid ties Dave's right hand and places a padlock on his belt to ensure he doesn't seek pleasure alone. Also, to show him how 2 is better than 1, something is quickly noticed. The next day at breakfast, every person has to sit alone in one table. They are all facing the same direction, the area with actual couples. David befriends Robert, who has a lisp, and John, who walks with a limp. To form a couple, it is mandatory that both have unique traits in common. For example, David, who is nearsighted, needs to find a woman who's also nearsighted. That's why in the first scene, where David talks to his ex-wife, he asks her if the other man wears glasses. She says yes. Something that at first sounds very strange, but in this superficial world, it isn't. It's as if the movie is mocking how superficial we can be in our own world when it comes to looking for a partner. The 3 of them look for a partner who shares their respective characteristics. They came across a woman with a nosebleed, one that likes milks and cookies, and another described as heartless, but neither matches their unique traits. Later, an assembly takes place in which the singles introduce themselves one by one to share their personal stories and distinctive traits. First, the limping man recounted that his mother had been turned into a wolf. She had bitten him on the leg, which is why he now walked with a limp. It was his characteristic, just like that of his late wife, who had died 6 days before. The curious thing is that this whole process is too serious, robotic, and monotonous. It's just like the way people talk in this world, without any feeling or passion.
I really missed her and I wanted a hug.
I just hope her pathetic screams can't be heard from my room.
It's all very empty, which is the complete opposite of how the process of falling in love should be. During the day, activities are organized to encourage interactions and formations of potential couples. At a party, David tries to connect by dancing with the woman with the nosebleed. When she gets blood on his shirt, she gives him numerous tips on how to clean it, and David realizes they have nothing in common. The day accumulates with an excursion to the woods, not for a picnic, but to hunt the loners, those rebels who escaped the hotel to avoid becoming animals. Using tranquilizing darts, the guests capture the loners and take them back to hotel to face their fate. Each captured loner grants them an extra day at the hotel. David fails to catch anyone. When he had the chance, he couldn't pull the trigger, watching his days at the hotel disappear rapidly. On the other hand, there is the star of the hunt, the heartless woman, who holds the female record of 192 captured loners. 12 days passed in a flash. David had hunted none, leaving him with only 32 days. During this time, the hotel strives to encourage couples to form. They demonstrated the advantages of having a partner. For example, if a man chokes while eating, a woman can save him. And if a girl is accompanied by a madman, he'll think twice before attacking her. On the other hand, since solitude pleasure is forbidden, a girl would have to tease them to make them feel pressure to find a partner. However, if they discard the rule, like this man, they receive a punishment. One day, the man with the limp told the group how they transformed people into animals. First, they removed their essential organs, and then, depending on the animal, the process varied. The organs that weren't used went to restaurants, while the blood was sent to hospitals. He had been told this by an uncle who knew a former hotel waiter.
That makes total sense.
After this, a new hunt began. David is standing next to a woman who loves cookies. Desperate to find a partner, she offers David favors, but he shows no interest. Everyone at the hotel knew of her desperation to find a partner, so she gave guidance to others. She confesses that she's thinking of jumping out of her window if she continues to be alone, but David just keeps staring out the window. The next day at the shooting range, David chats with his new friends. Robert asks him what animal they would choose if they couldn't find a mate. David replies that he would be a lobster, while Robert chooses to be a parrot, and suggests that they all choose the same animal to stay together. John criticizes the idea, pointing out Robert's speech impediment, and states that he has no intention of becoming an animal, promising to visit them with his mate if they end up transformed. In a tense moment, Robert tries to hit John, but David intervenes to prevent this pathetic conflict. Let's talk about the monotony in the film. The soundtrack is repetitive, and as mentioned before, even when they do or say something extreme, they deliver it in the same way they would anything else, in the emptiest way possible. It's like they're all dead inside.
I left him to die very slowly. Would you like some coffee?
I'd love some.
The shots are simple. Even in a fight scene, they're not exciting angles. No camera changes, everything is controlled, just like the people's relationships are controlled. The fight here is static, which makes it look ridiculous. This constant monotony serves to exemplify the farce they live in, and to make each image more impressive. Something important in film is, why say it when you can show it? And that's what we see. They live in an almost dystopian context of which they are barely aware, which is why they face it with such nonchalance. Everyone must have a partner, but there is no love. The relationships feel artificial. That's why even though there's green in the film, everything looks dull, cold, and lifeless. And that is what I wanted to get to. The monotonous tone is meant to highlight the artificiality of the relationships that's been built in this world. Even an intimate scene looks strange in this context. In The Lobster, relationships are often built on incredibly shallow similarities, rather than any genuine emotional connection. People are expected to find a partner based on something as insignificant as sharing the same physical trait, like frequent nosebleeds. To the audience, this feels absurd, and that absurdity creates much of the film's dark comedy. However, beneath the exaggerated premise is a familiar truth. Even outside the film, people naturally gravitate towards those they believe are similar to themselves. Shared interests, habits, or experiences can become the foundation of attraction, even when those things are relatively unimportant. The film pushes this idea to an extreme, but it reflects something that happens in real life as well. People sometimes exaggerate certain parts of their personality, or even pretend to have interests and traits that they don't genuinely possess, simply to appear more compatible with someone they want to be with. In that sense, the strange rules of The Lobster feel less fantasy and more like distorted reflection of real dating and relationships. The limping guy tries to get the girl with the bleeding nose interested. At first, she ignores him. So, in a desperate act, the man bangs his nose against the edge of the pool until it bleeds. Seeing him bleed, the girl thinks they have something in common and starts paying attention to him. They begin dating, and each time the limping boy hurts his nose, they secretly maintain their connection. It was a price he was willing to pay. In his own words, it was worse to be turned into an animal and eaten by a larger one in the forest than to bleed from time to time. He doesn't mind being in a superficial relationship based on lies as much as simply being alone. This left David thinking. Later, in front of everyone, the administrator declares them an official couple. They will live together in a doubled room and then on a yacht for a month. In total, they will be monitored. And if they have problems, a child will be assigned to them because that usually helps. With an applause, they leave the party. The film explores how social expectations shape the way people approach relationships. In the film, finding a partner is treated as a requirement for survival, with strict rules, limited time, and harsh consequences for anyone who remains single. Because of this pressure, relationships are based on surface-level similarities, instead of genuine emotional connection. Although the film's world is exaggerated, often absurd, it reflects real-life attitudes towards dating. While society doesn't push single people as dramatically, there's still a pressure to find a partner by a certain age, making many people feel as though being alone means they have failed or don't fully belong. One day, David tries to flirt with a blonde girl with perfect hair. He compliments her hair and asks if she likes his. She shows no interest and criticizes his dryness. Later, the administrator calls the blonde to see how she wants to spend her last night. She goes with her best friend, the girl with the bleeding nose, who reads her a letter. In the letter, she talks about the sadness she feels and admires her hair. When she mentions that the city won't be the same without her, the blonde slaps her, then decides to watch the movie Stand By Me Alone. The next day, she transforms into a pony, keeping her perfect hair. The movie Stand By Me is about friendship. The blonde girl clearly feels betrayed because her friend found a partner and is going back to the city while she isn't. That's why she hit her friend when she mentioned the city. It makes you think of someone who seems happy for you when you find a partner, but actually feels something else. The fact that the names are practically never used in the movie and that they look for something trivial and common to pair up shows how superficial relationships are in this world of the movie. This seems to suggest the idea that it doesn't matter who the other person is. What matters is that we seem to fit well together. How many couples don't form for this reason? While the days passed, David thinks that it is more difficult to pretend that you do have feelings when you don't, than to pretend you do have feelings when you do. A few days later, the cookie girl jumps out the window, just as she had said, but she doesn't die on impact. Withering in pain, the heartless girl who is there doesn't lift a finger to help her. With only 7 days left, David decides to pretend. He approaches the heartless girl, pretends to be as insensitive as she is. He says cruel things about the cookie girl, and his strategy works. She buys into the act, although she still has her doubts. So later, in the jacuzzi, the heartless woman pretends to choke on Olive to test David. True to his facade, he doesn't lift a finger. This convinces the woman, and then the administrator declares them a couple. They move him to a double room. David will now have to continue pretending he doesn't care about anything, which is quite difficult. One day, David and the heartless woman found the bleeding couple who had a daughter. The girl greeted David. However, he does something cruel to maintain the role. In an intimate moment, David makes noises and then sleeps with his hand near her. This makes the heartless woman suspicious. To test him, she kills David's dog, who is his brother, to see his reaction. Asserting that she let him die slowly, at first, David acts indifferent, but then she finds him crying in the bathroom. She discovers him, slaps him, and calls him a liar, and announces that she will take him to the hospital manager to be punished, suggesting that his punishment should be transforming into an animal no one wants to become. As they walk through the hotel, David punches the woman in the stomach and runs away. She chases after him and asks for help from the maid, who seemingly leads her to where David escaped. However, it was a trap. The maid had hidden David in a room. When she passes by, he shoots her in the back with a tranquilizer dart, knocking her unconscious. He plans to get revenge by getting the woman in the stomach like she did to his brother. But since she's asleep and wouldn't feel anything, with the maid's help, they instead take her to our transformation room. Before leaving, David also shoots the maid with a dart to prevent the manager from suspecting that she helped him. David escapes from the hotel, and in the woods, he encounters a group of loners and a leader as harsh as the one at the hotel. She tells him he can stay there forever, but without a romantic or intimate relationship. Those who break this rule suffer severe punishment, like the two who had their lips cut off for flirting, and that's how they welcome him to the group. David quickly learns that there are equally ridiculous but opposite set of rules he must live by as the hotel they all escaped from. They must not show affection to each other whatsoever, and breaching this contract results in a cruel, ironic punishment. But again, it's no crueler than what they would have received at the hotel. David faces a highly extremist society, which we see from the beginning of the interview when David hesitates for a moment about his sexuality and becomes clear that there are only two options: for men or women. Just like shoes, there's only one specific size. There are no half sizes, so regardless of whether it fits well or badly, he has to live with it. Society operates in black and white. Even neutrality is amplified. The most marked and significant difference is the one between single people and people in relationships. This division is so profound that it leads to a kind of witch hunt. The single men survived by hunting animals. Whether they were real animals or converted single people was irrelevant. They also learned to hide. That's where the nearsighted woman first saw our friend, who immediately caught her attention. In fact, that night, she dreamed that they lived together in the city, that he took off her clothes. And you know what happened next. Over time, the leader trains the group to avoid being hunted. During an exercise, one of the loners falls into a trap. Here, the leader said that no one would help him. The single people did everything on their own. Later, during a hunt for the hotel guests, Robert finds David to save himself. David tries to win Robert's sympathy by ensuring him that he has his only true friend and that he misses him. But Robert, with only 2 days left, is determined to capture him. Just then, the nearsighted girl intervenes, attacking Robert and saving David, which is not allowed, but it will be their secret. Simultaneously, the hotel maid and the leader of the loners are hiding. The maid, who is a spy for the loners and who has also helped David, tells her everything about the hotel, as the loners are planning an attack. The maid is fed up with her partner, but doesn't want to end up as a guest of the hotel. The leader asks for her patience and promises her a place in the forest after the attack. The scene changes to David, who manages to hunt a rabbit. The nearsighted woman with black hair, who has been narrating the film, mentions that David never confessed to her what animal he turned the heartless woman into. David replied that it shouldn't matter to her. When she saved him from Robert, she asked him to hunt a rabbit for her. Many people theorize that she was turned into a rabbit. She was a hunter of hunter loners and becomes hunted by loners. But this could have been left open to each viewer's interpretation. Every month, 4 lonely people pretend to be 2 couples so they can go shopping in the city. This time, the leader and her partner are accompanied by David and the black-haired girl. Finally, they enter the supermarket to buy supplies. Here, our friend notices that the police were checking people who were alone, even inspecting their shoes for signs of mud. He was left alone for a moment. Saying this, the men asked for his papers, at least until the woman with black hair arrived, and the men let him go. David learned that the woman, like him, was nearsighted, but she wore contact lenses. Later, they visit the leader's parents' house, who believes she has a high-powered job and travels for business. The others pretend to be her colleagues, and David and the black-haired girl act as if they were a couple with children. In the woods, David and the black-haired girl talk more, struggling to suppress their attraction he feels. The night of the attack arrives, and the loners, with the help of the maid, sneak into the hotel. The leader and the black-haired girl subdue the manager and her husband in the room. The leader asks the husband about his love for his wife. He affirms that he loves her. Then she asks him if he could live alone if his wife died. He says he could, since he spends a lot of the time alone while she works at the hotel. The leader then gives him a gun and tells him to shoot his wife to save himself. Without thinking, he aims and fires. But the gun is empty. The idea was to show them how little they care for each other, highlighting their superficial relationship. After escaping the rigid society that forced people into relationships, David joins the loners, hoping to find real freedom. Instead, he discovers that this new group is just as controlling, only in the opposite direction. While the first society treats being singles unacceptable, the loners see romantic relationships as something harmful and based only on selfish or superficial motives. In trying to reject one extreme, they create another. I think the loner's leader's attitude comes from her own negative experiences, which have convinced her that love always ends in disappointment, rather than accepting that different people can have different experiences with relationships. She imposes her beliefs on everyone else. That is why she completely forbids romance and being intimate within a group, by preventing emotional attachment from forming. She tries to prove that people are better off alone, and that love is ultimately meaningless. The loners can be seen as representing people who, after painful relationships or frustration with society's expectations, decide that staying single is the only path to happiness. This idea feels especially relevant today, when more people are openly choosing independence over romantic commitment. However, the film also points out that making singlehood into a strict ideology could become just as limiting as forcing people into relationships. In the end, both societies tried to control something that cannot really be controlled: human connections, attraction, and the need to connect with others. At the same time, David finds the man who was limping, having dinner on the yacht with his partner and daughter, all wearing striped shirts, a reflection of the prison they now live in. He tells the girl about the nosebleed, explaining that John fakes his bleeding to be with her. However, she responds by slapping David. Even the girl took a knife to threaten David. They won't allow their lie to crumble, and John kicked him out the yacht. It's better to turn a blind eye to deception than to be alone. Later, the lonely souls return to the woods that night. The maid joins them. Each person dances alone to the rhythm of electronic music with headphones. A total contrast to the hotel dance when it's slightly more classic and live music, also serving as a small metaphor for the ideologies of today's youth compared to those of the past. The next morning, while David is talking to the maid, she tells him how she got rid of her husband using a drill. Meanwhile, David sees the rabbit woman talking to another loner, which makes him jealous. He approaches her and reminds her that he was the one who brought her the rabbits. She assures him that it's fine and that they could even share the rabbits. That's why he attacked the man who, upon noticing that he wasn't nearsighted, left him. Then, our friend got closer and closer to the woman. They even developed a sign language to communicate without being noticed. On another occasion, they put on the same music, dance together, and end up kissing. On another outing in the city, they visit the leader's parents again. The parents play guitar and the girl with black hair kisses passionately. The leader sees them, feels uncomfortable, and interrupts, asking them to respect their parents, although the leader's mother says it doesn't bother her. Back in the forest, David and the black hair girl plot to escape together. The girl writes her plan in a diary, but before they can act, the leader finds it and discovers their forbidden love and escape plan. The leader is furious but decides not to confront them directly and devises another plan. She simply told David that it was time to finish his grave. After all, every loner should be on his own, because in the end, he'll die alone. Although, if that happened, she would visit him. But that black-haired girl isn't so lucky. The leader tricks her into believing she'll take her to the city to get her myopia corrected, but in reality, she blinds her. It was her punishment for breaking the rules. The black-haired girl becomes enraged and confronts the leader for blinding her instead of David. This confrontation might lead us to believe that the girl didn't truly love David, but was only with him for convenience. However, the film plays heavily with irony and ambiguity. If that were true, perhaps the girl was forged in coldness in front of the leader who despises feelings. Or perhaps this shows that even if you try to distance yourself from society, it affects follows you in a society where self-interest is reinforced and feelings and love are repressed. Selfishness seems natural. The girl tries to attack the leader, but accidentally kills the maid, as the leader tricks her by placing the maid in her path. Then, in a strange twist, the leader forgives her and allows her to go with David, probably to demonstrate that now that they no longer share a common trait, the relationship won't last. At first, she hides her blindness, but then she becomes honest. She worries that David will abandon her now, that they will no longer share the trait they once had in common. David, though worried, decides to stay. He helps her adapt by playing games to develop her sense of touch and smell. As the days go by, they look for other things in common, but they discover that beyond their current situation, they share nothing. David wants to kiss her, but with nothing in common, she says it's no longer possible. Then David devises a plan: eliminate the leader, escape from the forest, and then blind himself to become like her. At night, they put their plan into action. David captures the leader, ties her up, and throws her into an open grave for wild dogs to take care of the rest. Dressed in civilian clothes, David and the dark-haired girl leave the forest and enter a cafe. David asks the waiter for a knife and goes to the bathroom. He bites down on a piece of paper to stifle his screams as he prepares to blind himself. The girl waits, but time passes and David doesn't return. Suddenly, the film then cuts to black and we're left to contemplate the title. The Lobster. It's what David wanted to be turned into, leaving the fate of David and the dark-haired girl to the viewer's imagination, depending how optimistic or pessimistic you are. After the credits, the only thing we hear is the sound of the sea. This detail is meaningful because the lobster, David's chosen animal, has very poor eyesight, almost to the point of blindness. Throughout the film, characters are expected to share a defining characteristic with their partners. So blinding himself would restore their similarity between David and the short-sighted woman. It also connects with the common expression that love is blind, suggesting that love sometimes requires people to ignore logic and accept painful sacrifices. David's final decision presents two possibilities. He can blind himself and spend the rest of his life sharing her disability, or he can choose not to do it. He could even lie, since she would never be able to know whether he actually blinded himself. This dilemma mirrors that one made by the husband of the hotel manager. The story represents love as the willingness to sacrifice yourself for another person. If David blinds himself, despite what many people say, this isn't proof of true love, or that love is blind. It only represents selfishness, since he would be doing it to stay alive out of fear. and would be falling into social oppression. He wouldn't truly be a free man, since he would lose his sight to please others. However, it's worth noting that the mere fact of considering cutting off his eyes reveals that even though he escaped from cruelty of the hotel and the woods of the loners, societal norms continue to haunt him. If he decides not to blind himself, however, it would support the loner leader's belief that relationships are ultimately selfish and based on self-interest. By refusing to sacrifice himself, David would reveal that preserving his own life and well-being matters more than maintaining the relationship. In that sense, he would conform the film's criticism that many relationships are sustained more by convenience than by genuine commitment. Earlier in the film, the limping man explains that making a small sacrifice can prevent them from dying in the cold, being eaten by a bigger animal. My interpretation, after much thought, is that David knows leaving her will be bad for both of them, as they will be pursued by the authorities. Seeing how all relationships are built on pretense, even the film shows us that when the dark-haired woman asks why he blinded her and not him, the film reveals that no one is willing to sacrifice themselves for another person, especially with the shallow relationships prevalent in this society. He prefers to continue this lie rather than die alone and be eaten by a larger animal. The prolonged scene of the woman waiting for David doesn't mean he abandoned her and left, but rather that he left her alone in the sense that there was no sacrifice. He didn't take the bullet for her. People get a second chance of true love when they become like animals, which is why the film is titled The Lobster, because that wasn't the case with her. This isn't love if neither of them is willing to take the bullet for the other. There are only a couple in the most superficial sense, because in truth, aside from the supposed trait they have or had, David and the girl have nothing in common.